in charge of the sharks, the jellyfish, the nutrition. They are out there in kayaks with electronic shields on the bottom of the boat to create an elliptical field of electricity. Everybody's got their important place, and Bonnie is my head handler and my best friend, and she's really in charge of my life. She's over here close to me on a boat that's very low slung to the water with her team, and we are dealing with crises all the way across, even in training swims. There are hallucinations, and there's hypothermia, and there's nausea, and there's just plain pain, and there's constant hydration, and there's nutrition, as you can imagine. After a while, you're in salt water, you don't feel well, you're trying to eat in the supine position, so the digestion isn't working very well, and you know, you're never going to make it without the fuel. So in the beginning, we've got all this stuff planned, the protein shakes and the pasta. You know, she takes fistfuls of pasta and drops it in my mouth. There will be a job waiting for me at SeaWorld. I'm ready for SeaWorld when the bottom falls out. But I'm never allowed to touch the boat, never allowed to get outside the boat, but we're close by. Even if I need an injection, I can just get on my stomach and they reach over, the doctors, and give an injection into the buttocks, and it's an extreme enterprise. After about 35 hours, and I must say, you know, it's a tough sport, it's grueling, we all can see that, but the truth is, in my 20s, I swam more out of rage, and maybe I had good reasons for that. But in my 60s, there were some tough days that were hard to get through in the training, but there was a lot of joy also. There's the depth of friendship with these people on board. Nobody ever gets paid a cent. We're out there for adventure, and the collective courage of doing something that's never been done. There's discovery. You know, I wound up, after being stung by the box jellyfish, going to a prostheticist, and he makes beautiful silicone masks for people who've been in burns and fires, and you know, had grenades blow up in their faces in war, and they can't have their non-skin face exposed, and he made a silicone mask for me. It wasn't easy to swim in, but I never could have gone back for that 5th time without something new to get through those deadly animals. Sometimes I actually have this sensation that I'm swimming over the curvature of the earth. It's so magical out there. I'll stop in training swims. In Cuba, you don't take many breaks, and you don't spend a long time unless you're in crisis, because if you can picture, I'm trying to swim about due north, Havana to Key West, like this. And the Gulf Stream is over here. It's coming raging out of the Yucatan Channel, squeezed there, and it is flowing hard to the east, across this way, 4 times faster than any swimmer can swim. So you're going north, it's going east, and every time you're stung with jellyfish, you're vomiting because of, you know, wave action, saltwater intake, you stop and you're treading and you're dealing with your team over here, you're being dragged east, and pretty soon this tangent, this was the closest place, 100+ miles. Now you're over here, and the tangent to shore up here, Florida is curving away, gets to be 120. Then you get over here, and you're close to the Bahamas. After my 4th try, the team actually stopped me. The navigator said, after 51 hours, "How do you feel about going to the Bahamas?" Because that's where we're going. I said, "Not good. I want to go to my country, the USA." And I noticed that all of that, you know, tripping out on the majesty of the universe, occasionally I'll stop, especially in training, and, you know, take more like 15 minutes on a feeding instead of a quick take it down and get going again, just to, you know, be in a state of wonder, being immersed in this jewel of a blue planet of ours by day. By night, looking up way out there at 4 billion stars, and just being in awe of this life we get to live on this planet. And I'll say to my team, "You guys, I was reading Stephen Hawking last night, and he has this one sentence where he says, at the moment before the Big Bang, all of this matter and this energy that we know of in this universe today was compressed literally into the size of a millionth of a penny." Come on, doesn't that blow your mind? so, you know, we're in this state, and I must say that that state usually comes right along with sleep deprivation, which for me would usually come at around 30, 35 hours. And sometimes you just can't grasp onto reality. And the second night of our third try, I breathed to the left, and my boat's over here, and I thought that can't be, and I just kept looking. Every time my head would come back down, I just kept looking. You know, you don't see well after a while, and I thought, it is there. I see the yellow brick road. And then when I looked carefully, it wasn't those people who should be on the yellow brick road. It wasn't Dorothy and the Tin Man. It was those little guys with the knapsacks, the 7 dwarfs. And they were trudging along like this, and I yelled up to Bonnie and said, Bonnie, I see the yellow brick road and the 7 dwarfs are walking along it. Do you see them? And she said, oh yeah, I see them. Yeah. And she said, you know, the great thing is that they are going right where you're going. So you just follow them the rest of the night. And it was just so entertaining. Yeah. I saw them marching along, and because I breathed to the left, my right ear dips underwater, and just faintly, but I heard them. I hope it's off to work we go. You know, I didn't swim for 30 years. I tried Cuba when I was 28. It was my big dream. Went 42 hours way off here into the Gulf of Mexico. We didn't know what the heck happened. We've learned in subsequent years what those swirling eddies are on the edge of the Gulf Stream. They're difficult to predict, and now we have space telemetry. We have more technology to try to help somebody get across that passage. But I tried again the next year, and after training all year long for it, we couldn't get visas to get into Cuba. So I swam from the Bahamas to Florida, which was, you know, no slouch of an event. But it wasn't the hard event for me that Cuba was. You know, right then I was turning 30, and you know, I guess it's the time that most world-class athletes think about retirement. I was getting offers from the wide world of sports, and again, a lot of you might be too young, but since I was a kid, to have the chance to say the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat on the air, you know, and you can make some big money, travel the world, follow the great athletes from Olympic Games to Wimbledon's. It was intoxicating, and it was my time. And I can't say that during those years, 30 to 60, I stayed in shape, and I had my own fitness business, and you know, I was a total badass, rode a 100-mile bike ride every Friday, etc. But I wasn't a swimmer anymore, and I would watch whenever somebody would try to swim from Cuba to Florida. And I like to think I'm a sporting person. You know, when they wouldn't make it, I'd be at home doing a little happy dance. Oh, the dream is still alive for me. And during all those years, how can I complain about it? But the truth is, toward the end of it all, I started to feel like a spectator. I wasn't a doer anymore. All I did was talk about other people who were doers. And during that time, I met so many extraordinary people, as you can imagine. But the bravest soul I ever met was Christopher Reeve. Yeah. Talk about being relegated to a spectator role. Chris loved sports, he loved athletes, he loved their philosophies of life, and he asked me one day, he said, we always talk about athletes and all the great jocks you've met and what they think and what's at the heart of their, you know, their enterprise, and I don't know your story. What's your story? And I said, well, you know, the first long-distance swim I ever did was across Lake Ontario, and it was cold that day. It was 48. And I've never been a terrific cold water swimmer. I'm much better long distances in warm water. That's where I excel. But I did Lake Ontario. I was standing on the beach, And 444 people are going to hear a gun and race from Niagara on the Lake all the way over to Toronto. It's a long, cold day ahead, more than a day probably. And I'm getting used to the fact that the men and the women compete equally in this sport. So as I'm getting ready, I've just been greased in 10 pounds of wool fat lanolin for the cold. And by the way, that's a singular experience right there. You know, you can just do that and go home and tell people you did that. But I'm noticing that, you know, the Egyptian guys are over here getting all greased down, and they're looking kind of bulky and muscular, and I'm looking at the Argentine guys over here. They're a little more slender, but they're muscular, and I think, whoa, that first half mile is going to be some like big wrestling match, and I'm a little intimidated. The cold, the guys, and the world champion at the time for women, the greatest long-distance swimmer in the world, was a Dutch woman named Judith de Nijs. Judith was 6'1", 182 pounds. Oh, she looked a little more like a tight end than a swimmer, and she picked this moment. I'm telling Chris this story backstage at a speech we were at, right before we're about to start the race, and she comes swaggering across the beach to me over here, and she takes a large index finger. She jabs it on the grease on my chest. I was so intimidated, I just stood there, and she jabbed it with every syllable. I had a bruise this big for a month. And she said, "I hear you're a very good swimmer. Well, you're not going to beat me." And she went swaggering off, and I know this can't be true, but I thought the beach trembled slightly when she walked. And I said to my coach, "I'm not going in, these people are animals." And the gun went off, and I went swearing in Arabic like all the Egyptians. And I got in there, and it was a cold, long day. But I started getting signals. As I said, you can't touch the boat, but you come close to get your food and, you know, get signals from your team. And they're telling me that Marwan Ghazawi has dropped out, and I've passed Claudio Plitt from Argentina. And I finished in 37 hours, 38 minutes. And I was third among all the men that day, and Judith de Nijs announced her retirement from the entire sport. But the real point of that story, as I was telling Chris, was I was cold, my core temperature had gone down, I was taken to a hospital in Toronto, I was put in a chair in a corner of an emergency room with a Mylar blanket wrapped around me. So I was just sitting there shivering, waiting to be taken care of. And right then, a guy was rolled in on a gurney, and he was in pain. He was grimacing and crying out loud, and I found out later he had been in a cigarette boat accident on Lake Ontario that day. His boat had flipped, and now he had a broken pelvis, a broken jaw, and internal injuries. He was in bad shape, and they rolled his gurney over close to me, so our faces were about this far apart, and they all left, and we were sitting next to each other, and he's like grimacing, and I'm shivering out loud like this. And I think just to pass the time, get his mind off his pain, he asked me what I was doing in there, and I said, "I just swam across Lake Ontario. It took me 38 hours. And he said, "Why the hell did you do that?" And I found out how beat up he was, and I asked him similar questions. But what he told me was that he loved the adrenaline. He was a junkie of feeling that alert and awake. Because when his hands were on the wheel of that boat, literally a centimeter mistake could be a fatal accident for him. He loved that, and he wished he could take that to the rest of his life. He lived for it. And he said to me, "Why? You know, why would you do something that's so much suffering to it?" And I said, "You know, this is my first marathon swim, but what I liked about it, and I think I'm going to do more, is that just like life, you come upon a rough patch, you're at the bottom of a valley, you turn to your team, and they help you, and you don't give up. It's easy to give up. I saw the other swimmers going by me in their boats in a nice warm blanket because they gave up. And I love the fact that, forget about where you finish or if you break the records, I love the fact that when I stumbled up onto that beach, I was a person who was strong inside and I could stand tall because I didn't give up. And that's what that sport was for me. I did it for 10 years. As I told you, I tried Cuba. So I was telling Chris this story backstage, and I told him also that, you know, I'm so interested where we all get our philosophies of life. I'd love to come sit down in your chairs and have you all come up. We could take the next week, everybody come up 45 minutes at a time. And I'm sure you would tell stories about your grandmothers and your uncles and a particular wonderful teacher where when things were tough for you, you got some words of wisdom. Well, oddly enough for me, my words, a philosophy of life that I've lived all these days by, came to me when I was 17 years old. And oddly enough, they came from another teenager. I was walking down the pool deck toward the last 100-meter backstroke after 10 years of 4:30 in the morning, 1,000 sit-ups every day, never 999. I mean, the sacrifices ran so deep for me, I didn't even smoke pot in the parking lot in high school. I was all in. I have to make the top 3 in this 100-meter backstroke. Top 3 go on to the elite of the Olympic trials who are going to swim to go to Mexico City, 1968, Olympic Games, bow their heads, and receive medals for the United States of America. The others are going to go on to the rest of their lives. And I'm just walking on that pool deck with the weight of the world on my shoulders. 10 years. 4:30 in the morning, 365 days a year, never lost faith. I'm going to get there. I'm going to be one of the special ones. And my friend, Suzanne, she's 17. She comes over and she grabs me and she says, "What is going on with you? You look like you're in a daze." And I started in with, you know, the coach and my family sacrifices and the sit-ups. And she said, "Stop it, stop it." She said, "Remember, it was just 6 months ago that you had us all sit in the bleachers, the whole team, and you gave us that wonderful speech about how we reach up and we look for that bright, nearly impossible star, that dream of ours. And then we tuck that away in our imaginations and we get down to the daily grind of discipline and focus. We put in the time, and one day, if we're not up touching that one magical star of the dream, we're up in the heavens breathing some pretty rarefied air. But you're the one who said the way you get there is here. It's with the laser focus. So what are you doing thinking about the big perspective?" She said, "Remember, we just watched that documentary on Billie Jean King. And Billie Jean says that when she gets to Wimbledon, she doesn't go over and look at the big draw and look at the big picture and say, oh yeah, and if I get her in the quarterfinals, I've read that her second serves improved a lot." No. Billie Jean is like a cheetah on the hunt. When she steps onto the grass of Wimbledon, she doesn't know who the opponent is. She doesn't know who the chair umpire is. She hasn't heard the weather report. She's not playing the match, the point. Billie Jean isn't even playing the ball. She's playing the fuzz on the ball. So first Zen athlete, and as that ball comes over, cheetah on the hunt, she hits the most perfect backhand possible. If the ball comes back, there's Billie Jean at the net hitting the overhead, and 2 weeks later, she's walking around with the Wimbledon trophy above her head, which she did 20 times. Yeah, Billie Jean did, everybody.